sorry if you've been sitting here listening to me talk to myself. I don't think anyone is currently listening to me talk, so that's great. I am recording now currently for both YouTube and Facebook. Yay me. So now that I think I've gotten that done, I think I'm going to go ahead and jump into a couple of these topics. So I don't know. The topic I'd put up was like, what are your burning questions about art yarn? I know I've gotten a lot of newer spinners, I think, that have ended up in this group and also on YouTube. And that's kind of, you know, we all start out, I don't know, I feel like we all start out kind of making wacky yarn, and then the goal becomes, I want to make normal looking yarn. And then after you've kind of mastered making normal looking yarn, sometimes it can be fun to go back in the other direction and be like, let's make some wild and crazy yarn. So it's really funny if you are looking at just the term art yarn. Like if you Google SEO, like I like to do, the term art yarn will come up as art yarn or yarn art. So it's kind of funny because it can go either way. You can either use yarn to make art, or you can make art out of yarn. I guess it would be making art out of fiber, but it's definitely one of those fun terms that can go either way. And I feel like when a lot of people think of art yarn, you can think of anything from like the really big, like tapestry weaving, almost ropey looking yarn with lots of embellishments, and I love that. And I know usually if that's what you're looking to spin, the really like thicker chunky yarn, I of course always send people to Ashley Martineau, who's in this group. But my friend's YouTube channel, Nouveau, she is like the queen of chunky art yarn as far as I'm concerned. My style of spinning for art yarn is usually more, I like to call it knittable. Not that Ashley's isn't, because I know she can make, like you can see back here, she's made some really cool sweaters and different vests and things. So I don't mean to sound like you can't knit with the really big stuff, but for me, I prefer knitting with more like worsted to bulky, like DK to bulky is kind of my range. So that's where I like to knit. So that's kind of what I spin. So to me, when I'm talking about art yarn, I'm kind of talking about making more unusual yarns, but still in that DK to bulky range. And that is if you go on my website, where all of the patterns in the free pattern for hand spun yarn or unusual yarn section all mainly fall. There are a couple for like indie dyed like sock yarn shawls, but for the most part they all fall in that DK to bulky chunky range, where you could have accent sections. So that's my rambly art yarn introduction of what I consider art yarn to be. And it looked like on YouTube, most of everyone answered they wanted to know more about, let's see, what were my topics? Locks, beads, and just texture in general. And so, first off, locks and beads are their own type of texture. So you can definitely add texture to your yarn by using locks or beads. But I really think if you look at it, and I don't know, those of you who have taken my Dream Yarn course know that everything on that, I kind of build stuff off of each other. So I really think, when I start thinking about what type of yarn I'm trying to make, I start thinking about the actual structure of, I guess, that how I'm going to spin that first single that just is a single, if it stays a single ply, or that first single that may end up getting chain plied or may end up getting two plied, and so then you're putting those together. So I always think it's helpful to go with kind of that first initial structure of your yarn. And so there's kind of two ways that I think, and I teach, that you can go about that. You can either, for art yarn, let your single be more of a normal single and then add things into it, like this little tuft of locks that I've been waving around, as well as other things I have to show you. Or you can let your single be, the single itself be a more unusual, like doing a purposeful thick and thin yarn that is in itself texture. Or you can easily take that base, so that's kind of the first layer of you know, a more textured single, and then through like thread plying, you can add texture on top. So it's kind of like you're building on top of that first single, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of how I think about it. Of course, you could do some sort of hybrid of both of those. So that's always possible. That's always possible. But, okay. So for adding locks, and I have, these are some dyed locks I just had laying around, and you can see they are fuzzy. Get up here. You can see the structure when they get dyed, and it also, there can be lots of different types of locks, lots of different breeds. I am not a breed expert, so I don't want to sound stupid, but some of them are definitely longer than others, but I feel like the dyeing process, at least in the ones I've gotten, can kind of, they're usually kind of stuck more together, but you can see how these were dyed, you know, in a line that way. You can still definitely see the texture. So if I'm going to be lock spinning, what I would do is, before I start spinning, so this is your pre-work, is I would go through, and you can either, you could lock spin a larger piece like this, if you wanted something where you had like the little yellow tail, or if you really wanted it thinner, you could pull it out that way. So 2 different ways I've incorporated locks in my spinning are, you could either do what in my art yarn course, I'd heard it called tail spinning, so that's what I called it, because I didn't want to be making things up. But basically, you can either leave this as one more together section, and you can just attach it as you're spinning, so that you then still have kind of a tassel, and that's making more of a tasseled yarn that obviously would be awesome as some fringe. It could be great in a weaving, but that's going to be where you have your yarn and then a tail, like tassel, hanging off of it. Another way that I've spun locks, probably the way I spin them more often, would be to really pull it down to just the little fluffy fiber. And then as you're spinning, instead of leaving the tail hanging, spin more of the whole thing, like if that's yarn, spin it onto the yarn so that the color and the texture is going along the yarn. So it'd be along the yarn versus hanging from the yarn. There's my great visual demonstration of that. So those would be the 2 different ways I would add texture with locks. Both of those are covered in the my art yarn course and probably some other videos on YouTube. I have made so many at this point in time, I cannot keep track of them unless they are not contained in some sort of a section. So that's why I'm referencing that. But like I said, so you can either attach while you're spinning just one side and have a tassel, or you can place this onto the fiber as it's spinning and let the twist grab it, and then it's going to be on the yarn. And you will still have, I mean, I think that's the whole point, nice little curly cues that kind of stick off, so you end up with kind of a marbled effect. So like if you had like a cream colored single and then we're adding these in, I mean, that'd be really cool. I actually think I just made that exact yarn I just described. Maybe last month I had, so I don't know, go look on Instagram, you can see a picture. Yeah, it was this stuff, and that's what I did. It was a natural cream colored yarn, and then I just layered these in as I spun, and it turned out awesome. I was really excited about it. So that is how, like, kind of a little intro of 2 different ways I would add texture with locks. Let's see, what else did we have? I tried to write things down so I sounded smart. Oh, beads. And I wish I had some beads to show you, but those of you who have known me well enough to know my daughter, my oldest, is now 10, and she thinks she's super crafty, and like, it is very hard having a craft business in a house with a kid that wants to pirate through all my drawers and steal all of my craft supplies that are laying around. So my bead stash may have gotten ransacked, so I don't, and I honestly don't really spin beaded yarn. I think I did when I filmed this course, and I did some just for fun at that time, but that's not a usual style I do. But the idea with the beads is that you are going to get a tiny little crochet hook, like the tiniest crochet hook you can find, and then there's little seed beads that come in like a pack at Hobby Lobby or wherever. So you get the little tiny seed beads, and of course you could use whatever size beads you want. I didn't want giant beads in my yarn, so that was the challenge, was I wanted really small beads in my yarn. But then in order to use very small beads, you have to use very small crochet hook. So what you do with that is you are basically getting the fiber, and you're going to get like a little tuft of fiber, and then you're going to get your bead, and you're going to stick the little crochet hook through the bead, grab a, little bit of the fiber, and then you're going to pull it back through. Imagine that there's a little bead there. So you're going to pull it back through the bead. So what you're trying to end up with is lots of little fiber tufts that would look just like this, except imagine that there would be a little bead right there. So once you have, for as many as you wanted there to be, so you go through and make all of your little beaded fiber tufts. You like my official term there, beaded fiber tufts. So you make as many of those as that you want to incorporate into your yarn, and then you're going to lay those out before you start spinning. And then you are literally just going to spin your fiber tufts into the yarn as you're spinning. So that is how I would add beads. And when you're spinning, as we've already covered, but for the people who are new, the twist is the glue. So if you have fiber going this way and it's getting twist put in it, and then you layer the beaded fiber tuft on top of it and the fibers going the same way, then all of those fibers are going to get mixed up together. And here, pretend this silly cocktail ring I have on is a bead. That's perfect. So pretend that's the bead. It is then mixed in with the fiber as it got turned into yarn. So then it's actually locked in there. So you're not making yarn and then stringing it with beads. You're putting the bead on the fiber and then adding the beaded fiber to the yarn. Or at least that's how I do it, and that's how I teach it, and it turns out really well. So that's how I do beads. And last but not least, we have sparkle as another way to add texture. And I know this video is getting a little long, but I clearly like talking about this topic. Here is a study in silver sparkle. And so there's different types of silver sparkle. And all sparkle, to my knowledge, is some form of nylon, because, sheep don't grow sparkle. But there's different varieties. So this one that is your more traditional confetti sparkle, I've always seen sold called Angelina. And it is what you think of when you think of like birthday party confetti sparkle. And then this, I've always heard Firestar, and if you get my BAT subscriptions, you probably see this a lot in the description. It is more of a hair-like texture. And it does have shine, but it's more of a fiber hair texture, whereas this is confetti texture. And I love both. Honestly, the Angelina is a little bit more sparkly, and I do love things that are a little gaudy. I'm pretty gaudy myself. So I really like these. I really like this as well. I feel like this is where most people land. It's more around liking the fiber that's more hair-like. But you can either add these in a bat or a roll-log, however it is you're doing it, so you can add it to your fiber ahead of time. Hold on, I need a drink. Or you can add it in by hand as you're spinning. And that's going to be the same idea as what we talked about with the lock, as you are adding it in as you're spinning. And then that adds not just color variation, but especially if you use the Angelina that is more confetti-ish, you will have little pieces that kind of stick off from your yarn, which some people really like and some people don't like. I think it's fun. Heidi and I made a bunch of really fun yarn that was like peacock colored that had this in it. It was a collaboration a few years ago. So that is another way to add texture. And then, of course, I have to show off, like, once again, from Ashley has her brand Nuvo, and this is her washed textile blend, and this one was Michelangelo. And you can see this little bag I got from her is a whole bag full of recycled textiles, so it's like yarn and fiber bits and all sorts of cool stuff that you can add into bats, and those end up looking like this, kind of tweedy. This was a little baby one I made. So the addition of that, they end up looking really tweedy. And I like using these with the more natural wools, and then you add the tweeds in. And then as you're spinning, that's a really easy way for the texture to already be built in, because you're spinning, and as you're spinning your yarn, imagine that that's a wheel, then the little tufts are all getting distributed into your yarn, and so you end up with this fun tweed situation happening. So you can definitely get those on her website. Like I said, that's where I know a lot of me and my fiber besties, we all love getting stuff from her. Fiber apothecary, which I love the term of, so that's definitely one of my favorite sources. And like I said, here is an example of a little deconstructed bat at this point in time that I could use to spin some yarn with texture. So anyhow, that is everything I'm going to go over. I think that covers locks, beads, and texture. So I hope that answered some questions. I don't want to overwhelm everybody all at once. If you would like to know more about spinning art yarn and see these with homework and breakdownable, you know, small chunk videos, I don't like to get information too much all at once. So that's one thing I really like about taking and creating more online education content. I don't like them to be, because I've gotten online material from people before. I prefer things to be broken down into multiple smaller videos instead of like one big giant masterclass, because that way I can go back to just the individual sections. So that's definitely how mine is set up. If you would like to grab the art yarn course, it is on my website. Use code FIBERART40 and you will save 40% through the end of this month, which is in like a week, so don't sleep on it. So that's FIBERART40, and that is my art yarn adventure course that is on there. So if you would like more in-depth information on all the topics I just covered, and homework, and multiple videos, and all that jazz, please don't miss the sale, and go check it out. Have a good one. I mean, I gotta hit off on all these different places I have to hit off.